In the cases of men like Alton Sterling and Eric Garner, oftentimes the black community is ready to rally to go get justice for these men after they've been murdered. However, the time for the black community to take action is when these men are alive. Because maybe if the black community rallied to help these men when they were alive, then maybe they wouldn't walk into the path of law enforcement. When it comes down to men like Eric Garner and Alton Sterling, they usually wind up in these situations primarily because, in most cases, they wind up being raised in these single mother households. And the single mother does a very good job of making her boys emotional, but she does not teach her boys the life skills that they need to survive in the world. Because when I look at the case of your Eric Garner, here we have a man standing outside of a foreign owned beauty supply store peddling loose cigarettes to people, showing me that this man has no understanding of how the job market works, or even how to start a business for himself, or how to even navigate any sort of situation where he can make a living for himself. He's selling loose cigarettes because this is the only thing he knows how to do. Same thing with your Alton Sterling. Now, your Alton Sterling was out here peddling bootleg DVDs outside of an Arab-owned store. And he was doing that also because, again, he's probably raised by one of these single mothers, and he doesn't have the life skills or the social skills to understand how to start a business venture that is legitimate. And I look at both of those cases, and it clearly shows me that these men, they weren't taught what they need to know to go out here into the world, because in both cases, they were doing activities that were illegal. You had your Eric Garner peddling loose cigarettes, which is illegal, and you had your Alton Sterling, who was out here selling bootleg DVDs, which is illegal. And some black people will sit there and say, "Oh, he was doing that because it was the only thing that because they wouldn't get no opportunities." But there were actually a lot of opportunities out there for guys like this, and there were programs like the one I used to work at when I was at AmeriCorps called the Strive Job Readiness Workshop. Now, this was a job readiness program that really would have benefited a man like your Eric Garner tremendously, because the Strive Job Readiness Workshop is a job readiness program that deals with people like Eric Garner who are ex-offenders, single mothers, and even the homeless, and they help them find employment. When I was working there, they would help people get jobs, and they would help people like your Eric Garner find employment. So, and in many cases, people at Strive had their jobs for 2 years or more. So a guy like Eric Garner did have a program he could have gone to, which was the Strive program. Unfortunately, most black people don't want to do any sort of heavy lifting or hard work. And in the case of your Alton Sterling, he might have been benefited from the Strive program, but I don't know how much he could have benefited. But because he has a record as a sex offender, but he could have benefited from that type of program as well. Because those are type of programs, they do help people find employment. They do help them get their mind right, and they do help them get their head right. And if they didn't want to do job readiness, there were other tools that guys like Alton Sterling and Eric Garner could have used to find a way to make a living for themselves. Because doing things like selling cigarettes loose and peddling bootleg DVDs, that's some dusty stuff. That's some low grade stuff. That's what people with no life skills do. That's like one step above standing outside of that Arab-owned store and asking guys who pass by for 50 cents. That's something that, a guy who is trying to make a living is just not going to do. And the whole crazy thing is you'll see these same guys out here like this, and what they'll do is they'll have a $500 iPhone in their hands given to them by their girlfriend or their mother. And sadly, these guys will not have the vision to understand that on that phone is an app called eBay. And all you need to do when you have an eBay app is go get yourself a PayPal account, which is very easy if you have email, and go get yourself a bank account, checking account, and just put $100 in there. And that's not that hard to do altogether. And once you do that, you pretty much have the foundation to start an eBay business. And from there, you can be selling all sorts of items and pretty much making money for yourself. I've seen a lot of toy collectors do this, and what they do is they'll go to Toys R Us and they'll go pick up some action figures like Marvel Legends, or at the time, back in the day, DC Universe Classics, and they'll put those action figures up for auction, and they'll make a pretty good amount of money off of those action figures. And that's a legal and legitimate thing that black men could do. Unfortunately, a lot of black men don't even think about doing this. They think that going to sell these bootleg DVDs is going to help them. And all it does is help make you a target of law enforcement. There are all sorts of tools online. There's all sorts of online tools. Not just eBay that you can use, but there's a couple of other tools out there. And if these guys could write, they could also use tools like Amazon's Kindle, Smashwords, what was the other one? Barnes & Noble's Nook, and that could be a revenue stream. But unfortunately, most black people are only thinking about getting these guys justice, not getting them the tools that they need to build their own foundation for economic empowerment. Because we really need to focus on getting these guys a way to make a living for themselves. Because if we focused on them making a living, then they, again, would not be a target of law enforcement. And that's the focus that black people really need to start taking a long, hard look at. Because I'd rather see these guys go out here and rebuild their lives than become victims of law enforcement. Because that's what most black people are focused on, making these guys into victims, then going out to march and protest. And that's not constructive at all, because that's sliding the country into a downward spiral. And each of these cases, when these black men wind up becoming killed by law enforcement, these cases cost us all money, because all the taxpayers, we have to pay for those settlements. That Eric Garner settlement cost the city $9 million in tax money. Now, if this man were out here working and making a living, then maybe he'd be paying taxes into the system and paying to help the country, because that's more constructive than having this guy dead and then having his children now being raised by a single mother, continuing to perpetuate the cycle, and then at the taxpayer's expense, we're still paying for these cash settlements in these cases. We have to start thinking more constructively about preventing the deaths of these black men, because when we think about preventing the deaths of these black men, what happens is they can contribute to society overall. And this is something that, a lot of black people aren't thinking about, because they walk lockstep in the narrative of this white liberal who wants to promote this idea of black victimhood, because black victimhood is a profitable business for them. Keeping these black men, targets of racial profiling and police brutality, that makes them money, because as long as you guys are arguing and going back and forth, they are allowed to maintain their political power and the economic power that they maintain in these situations. And when I look at these cases, I look at it and say to myself, we need to start thinking about preventing the deaths of these black men, and we need to start thinking of ways to help these black men when they're alive, because when they're dead, nothing gets better, it only gets worse. And when if these men were alive, then maybe they could contribute to society in a more constructive way. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe.